haven't signed your 3rd through 12th grade student up for summer camps yet, please do that at cosmocamps.org. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dottie Metcalf-Lindenburger. She is a former NASA astronaut, also an educator, a geologist, and lived under the ocean for 2 weeks. Yeah. So, here's Dottie Metcalf-Lindenburger.
Thank you so much. It's really awesome to be here. I feel right at home. Like I was talking with family members just before. My dad was born in Kansas, and I grew up in Colorado. So I feel like right next door, right? And I'd come here on family vacations, and so it's really nice to be in a place where you feel like at home. I now reside in Seattle, Washington, which I really love too, because I'm an outdoor like they said, I'm a geologist and I love being outdoors pretty much every day. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about STEM and the experiences I had to get me to space, and then of course my time in space. And then I want to talk to you about what's happening in space now. And I always start out, I do a lot of talks to all audiences, not just the young, but the young at heart. And I just want a reminder that the space industry needs you. The aerospace industry needs young people. And there are so many places that they can fit in, not just being an astronaut. And that was so true of me becoming an astronaut, of all the people that helped make it possible for us to go into space. So I just like this reminder of we need lots and lots of people. And for all of us, I think we need 3, and sometimes I would add a 4th C here, throughout our entire life, right? Every day, I'm curious. I get to check out some stuff here at the Cosmos that I have never seen before. I try to stay challenged in my life. I'm a runner, and like I said, I'm an outdoor person, so I'm constantly trying to push myself. I'm going to talk about academically how being at NASA challenged me. And then we have to have the courage to go do hard things, right? And so I think these 3 C's are really important throughout life. And then I would also probably add championing. Like we need to champion for others and give back to the communities that we came in. So I was a curious kid, and this is me in 1983 when Sally Ride became the first American woman to fly in space. And as a 3rd grader, you start to kind of think about like, what's possible for me? And my parents were both in STEM. My dad had a science background and had been a middle school science teacher before working for Hewlett-Packard. And my mom had been a math high school teacher, and then was my mom for several years before she went back to teaching adults as well. So my sister and I had no choice. We were going to be doing STEM. And in 1983, I was really excited about the flights of the shuttle, and specifically seeing now women fly in space. But I didn't know that women didn't fly in space. I just knew that my parents were really excited about this. So when my teacher asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I made myself as an astronaut, because like everyone was talking about space. And that in 1983, the movie The Right Stuff came out. So like I was really excited about space. But I was also excited about a lot of things as a 3rd grader, and so I just kept studying it. It wouldn't be until middle school that I saw myself as a scientist, and that was thanks to my middle school teacher, Mr. Jordan, who had an after-school club called Mesa Math, Engineering, Science, Applied, and I was part of this club. And Mr. Jordan took myself and another student to California to present a project where we took our food waste and we had turned it into ethanol to fuel his lawnmower. And so we were presenting that. So it was the first time I saw myself as a scientist, and I loved it. So I kept doing science, which took me to my own space camp, not here to the Cosmosphere, but I went to Huntsville, Alabama in April of 1990. In addition to learning from engineers that come over from Marshall Space Flight Center, and pretending like I was an astronaut, pretending like I was part of mission control, I also learned about the Hubble Space Telescope. Because in April of 1990, the vehicle Discovery carried Hubble into space. So when I came back from camp, I built the model and I hung it in my bedroom as that physical reminder, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And now I knew what you needed to do. It wasn't just that I was excited, but now I knew the steps you needed to take to actually become an astronaut. So I continued to be a part of science clubs. In high school, I competed in Science Olympiad. This is our team taking second place in Pueblo, which doesn't seem too far away from Kansas. And I point this out, I was just recently in Dubai, and a student asked later from the audience, they're like, well, when you took second place, why didn't you just give up? And I was like, oh my gosh, what if I gave up after every time I didn't take first, which would have been so many times, right? Like as a runner, that's like most of the time for me. And I thought, but actually it's a good question. Like, why don't we give up? And the reason I didn't want to give up is because I loved it. I was enjoying it. I was learning from it. This was something exciting to me, and I knew I could do better, right? We can always improve, but we're okay where we're at too. So yes, I took second place and I didn't give up. What took me to the Northwest for the very first time was going to college. I wanted to be in an academic rigorous field because I knew I needed to have a science or technology or engineering background to apply to NASA. And I also wanted to keep running. So I had run track and cross country in high school and done very well in that, but I'm not a Division I runner, I'm like a Division III runner. So at Whitman, I could run and I could do academics. And I also found out I could do really good internships. So my first internship was outside of Yellowstone. This was our last day. We were leaving in late August and it snowed up on the Beartooth Pass. But it was an amazing internship, and again, it just reinforced that I had gone into the right field. I was super passionate about science. In the bottom right-hand corner, that's me, of course, getting ready to graduate from Whitman. And like all people that are like, you know, planning to be an astronaut in their life, I had a plan. And so I had been accepted to the Peace Corps to teach English in Kazakhstan. Then I was going to come back, go get my master's in geology, a PhD. I wanted to work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and do geology, maybe work with rovers or probes at the time. Uh-oh, did I turn it off? Maybe. Well, I'll just keep using my teacher voice and I'll figure out the technology. Oh, here we go, I got it. And so that plan changed because Kazakhstan pulled away from Russia right as I was supposed to be going, like about a month before I was supposed to go. And I couldn't go because it was unstable. So I suddenly was going back to my parents' basement and trying to figure out, like, how am I going to get back on track? Because I couldn't just jump into a graduate school. And my parents said, well, you were going to teach English as a second language in Kazakhstan, but like, you're not even an English teacher, but you are a really good scientist. You could actually teach science. And so I thought about that, and that's what I decided to do. So I went back to school, and I became a high school science teacher, you know, just kind of thinking I'd do it for a few years. And those few years turned into 5, and it was in my 5th year when one of my students asked this really important engineering question: how do you go to the bathroom in space? And this, it's because I was teaching an astronomy class, and I was like, I don't know exactly what the toilet looks like, but that's a really important question to have answered if we're going to space frequently. So I looked it up, and of course it took me to the NASA website, which this is a very popular question with young people. And so I found out how you go to the bathroom in space. But then I also found out that they were hiring teachers as part of the 2004 class of astronauts. And I couldn't believe it. Like, I was on the right trajectory, even though I thought I wasn't. So I had to apply. And in applying, I got the interview. And during interview week, this is the shuttle training toilet. And so I had to take this picture for my students to say, you know, this was a really important question, and it got me to this interview. And then I waited for another 6 months before I found out in one of my classes that I had been hired to become an astronaut. So you have to be curious, like the whole time throughout our lives, because you never know where it's going to take you. As astronauts then, of course, we're constantly challenged, and challenged in ways I had never been challenged before. Because I was not an aviator, and so I was going to learn a whole lot of new things. But the important part is that you never learn it alone. So we start out as a team, and this is my class of astronauts as we came in. For any of you that have had the chance to see the movie A Million Miles Away that's on Prime, it is about my classmate Jose Hernandez. It's a really good inspirational movie as well. But anyway, all of us ended up flying in space, some multiple times. Some of my classmates, these two, currently run the astronaut office, so it was a great class to be a part of. And this is the most recent class of astronauts that graduated about 2 years ago. And right now, Nicole Ayers is the first member of their class who just launched this last week and is up on board the space station. So we are flying great people to space. Astronauts come in, we do survival training. We come out of the military line of thinking and preparing people to fly. And so we do some of what they did in the early Mercury and Apollo days. So we do survival training because we're flying in airplanes. We do water survival training, which was like my least favorite day of training. And in addition to being a runner in high school, I was also a swimmer, but I do not like feeling like I'm drowning. So this day felt like forced drowning. But we all did it. And we didn't just, I got to do this 4 times. Most people did it 3 times. I got so excited the first time I tried to escape. And they were like, no, you need to wait until the helicopter finishes rolling over. So I got to show that I could do that one more time. The astronauts have to learn a lot of systems because first we start with airplanes, which all have cockpits, all have engines, all have ways of having electricity and communication, just like the space vehicles we fly in. So we started in Pensacola in slower airplanes, and then our regular flying aircraft is a T-38 jet, which is an amazing, goes at the speed of sound or faster, but we usually don't fly it that fast. It's just a really incredible aircraft. You can see an example out in the lobby. And it's a great way to put yourself in real risk situations and work together as a team on a weekly basis, which of course we can't get into space vehicles and do that on a weekly basis. So this is why we use the T-38 for our training. And then I, of course, came in during the shuttle day, so my training was on the shuttle. But now we're flying crew members still in the Soyuz. We still have a barter system with the Russians, so we still have Soyuz seats. And then, of course, the SpaceX vehicle. And we have Starliner, and Starliner will get up and running both directions. So those are the vehicles we're using. And then, of course, our main vehicle is the International Space Station, which is really exciting. This November it will celebrate its 25th birthday, where we have always had people living and working in space for 25 years. We could not say that when I was a little 3rd grader, right? So it's just very incredible. Over 4,000 different experiments and continuing, almost 300 astronauts that have gone there and visited and worked and lived there, built it. It's just an incredible vehicle. Astronauts work with robotic arms, and this is me doing some virtual work that got me ready then for flying the space shuttle arm. My crewmates, Stephanie and Jim, they use the space station arm, which is this one here. And then we use the shuttle arm for more like imagery during our mission in supporting our spacewalks. But of course, the arm not only serves as like a crane to move hardware around, but it can also, like in this example, move people around. And this is Josh Casada adding a solar array to the space station. Which brings me to astronauts have to do spacewalks. So a lot of our training is, of course, done in a huge swimming pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. And I started my Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory work 4 months after having my daughter, Cambria. I wouldn't recommend that. I would say wait at least 6 months, but it just didn't work out that way. So I started 4 months after having our daughter. And now she's going to graduate from high school this year. So she was 3 when I flew in space, and she's finishing up and getting ready to go off to college herself. And then that's my husband, Jason, who is a high school teacher. So anyway, we do neutral buoyancy laboratory work. You can see over here we have divers that are working with us. These mostly look and feel like the real suits, but if you look closely, there are floats and holes in the backpack so that we can move up and down the water column. It's amazing training, but it's really physical, so that's why it's one of my favorite trainings. And it gets us ready for space. It's super good at preparing astronauts for the skills that they need, because things change in space. In fact, our third spacewalk was completely different than we had planned, and that is just because of an ammonia hookup that was delayed. And so the skills that we learn in the water prepare us for what we need to be able to do out in space. My job, I was the backup spacewalker, so I didn't get to actually go outside, which, you know, I was a little disappointed, but also I really enjoyed supporting my teammates. So I talked to them the whole time. Since I had been their backup, I knew all of the steps that they were going to do. Then my job was to talk to them and work them through all of those steps. And I think it's funny that we call it a spacewalk because they never walk like they did on the moon back in the 70s. They always are doing handstands or going around in that arm, the robotic arm. So not really a spacewalk. Well, because the space station is 25 years old, almost, then astronauts do a lot of fixing and installing equipment as well. So they are your plumber, your electrician, you know, they show up and are there the whole time. Here you see Scott Kelly and Terry Burtz fixing a carbon dioxide removal assembly, the CEDRA, which is really important so that we remove carbon dioxide and can keep breathing the oxygen within the atmosphere of the space station. I like showing this video, and this is cool too because Anne McClain is the commander of the vehicle that just stopped to the space station. But this is on her first mission, and she's installing the refabricator. And the refabricator is just a fancy recycler of our plastic waste that then turns into a filament. And Samantha Cristoforetti is using the glove box. She was making 3D printed tools. So as we go out into space, we're no longer going to carry these toolboxes. It's just a lot of extra mass that you don't need to carry. And we will make the things that we need, including some of our 3D printing might even be printing the habitat we live in. So it's pretty exciting. And of course, like I said, almost 4,000 and counting experiments on board the space station. So we do a lot of really good science in all different backgrounds. From learning about our bodies, of course, and astronauts, we've learned all sorts of things that then come back and apply to how we can make better medicines here, how we can work to cure cancers. And then we can also build better equipment in space because unlike here where gravity settles heavier metals or allows for flaws, up in space there are less flaws in the equipment that we can make. We do a lot of preparing for the future, and being here in Kansas, of course, you know, because of the fickleness of weather and droughts and nutrients, we just need to be able to grow better plants here that can feed people. And so that's exactly what we do too, getting ready to feed astronauts, but also do better back here on Earth. So just really cool different types of experiments. We've discovered things in space we weren't expecting, like cool flames that show us that combustion can happen in a much different way than we were thinking about, and that can lead to better engines in our vehicles for the future. So really cool stuff that happens. And then I love this because of course Sunny just got back this week, but Sunny always has a playful attitude. And we are thinking about how to solve problems that we created ourselves. So there's a lot of space junk. And this type of satellite is thinking about how could you collect space junk. So again, looking at what we have around us, like tentacles, right? So tentacle-inspired creatures that would capture the space junk. And then the gecko stickiness was applied to the stickiness on these tentacles and then capturing whatever junk is there. So she was experimenting with that, and hopefully maybe this will be something that is really used in the future. Well, in addition to doing all these cool things, astronauts just have to take care of themselves, because if they're there from just a few days, like I was, 2 months, even a year in some astronauts' cases, our body immediately starts to have the heart atrophy, the big muscles atrophy, and so we have to exercise and eat properly. Eating is, of course, dictated by what is sent to us, and we have to control the sodium amounts, so we try to have a lower sodium diet, although it's still pretty high in sodium compared to your normal everyday foods because of the preservative aspect of salt. But we try to control that. Eating is also really fun in space, so. And then, of course, like I said, exercise. So exercising up to 2 hours a day. Now, in my case, we didn't have to do that. We could do an every other day cycle because I was there for 15 days. But for astronauts that are going to be there for months, it's really important to put a load onto those muscles that will put a load onto the weight-bearing bones, so that when they come back to Earth, that they are not weakened and that they're strong enough to recover quickly. All right, so we need to be curious. We need to challenge ourselves, and then we have to go do the big things. The crew I flew with is STS-131. Our commander was from the Navy, our pilot from the Air Force. Rick, Stephanie, and Clay had already flown in space along with Dex, our commander. And Jim, myself, and Naoko were all classmates, and we were the rookies in space. So the little girl who dreamed about flying in space and discovered, it's possible because of Sally Ride, and built the model of Discovery, I flew on Discovery almost 20 years to the day after going to camp. So having facilities like the Cosmosphere matters, right? Having places where we can bring young people and show them what's possible matters, because you never know where it's going to take you. So on April 5th of 2010, as we went into space, we got loaded up really early in the morning. We launched at 6 in the morning, so we got out to the pad just after midnight. I'm the last person to get loaded because I was mission specialist too. Before they light the main engines, they do a quick burn off of any hydrogen. Then the main engines light, and if everything's okay, then the solids light. And you can see that energy translated through us. And the next 2 minutes and 20 seconds is like riding a wooden roller coaster. And I emphasize wooden because there's a lot of shaking going on. None of these fancy roller coasters nowadays. So 2.5 minutes of the solids, just mostly getting us up, right? That's the big job of the solid rocket boosters. And then, of course, we're also heading down range, which in our case is at a 52-degree angle to help us get to the International Space Station. At 2 minutes and 20 seconds, those solids will come off. They'll fall back to the ocean and they were recovered. And then we will continue to ride on the 3 main engines in the back that are using the hydrogen and oxygen in that orange tank. And then at 8 minutes, about 8.5 minutes, the orange tank will come off and we are in space. So we went from Florida to looking down at like the UK and Ireland in 8 minutes and 30 seconds. It's quite the wild ride. But it was awesome. I loved like floating through the space station. Here I was delivering fast food, like literally fast food, 17,500 miles per hour type of food. This is looking out the cupola, which had just been added before our crew on STS-130. So we spent hours looking back at Earth, which is just so beautiful, so colorful. We get 16 sunrises and sunsets a day because we go around the Earth every 90 minutes. We get to see the auroras, the Milky Way. My commander's a really good photographer, and he took this photo of the Milky Way. It's just beautiful. And so whenever you have time, we like to look out. Just like whenever I have time, I like to look up when I'm on Earth. But we couldn't stay forever, so on April about the 17th, we undocked from the space station, and we spent an extra day in space because of weather, but then we came back and landed in Florida on April 20th of 2010. So almost 15 years ago for me. So most of the kids in this room, they weren't even born. It is so important to remain curious and challenged and courageous throughout our entire lives. And I'm excited too, because not only are we continuing the work at the space station for several more years, but we're also working collaboratively with countries around the world. And as of January 31st, we were in accords with 53 other countries that are also interested in exploring the moon peacefully. And our Artemis crew has been working and preparing and currently is scheduled to launch next February of 2026. So they won't actually land on the moon, but they will be making it very possible for the next groups to land on the moon. So follow along with them. They've got a pretty rigorous schedule. And then we're looking at building a space station that goes around the moon so that we can have a presence there, take what we have learned from the current space station, but work with new partners too. So there's new international agencies like in the UAE. They have a new agency as well. But then there's several companies that are also involved in this endeavor, which is very different than how it used to be. So it's exciting. It's exciting times. We're exploring, and that's what made me curious as a kid. So with that, I think we still have a little bit of time that we can do some questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Why are experiments like with medicine, with plant life, more effective in space? Is it the lack of gravity, or is it the purity of the air? Why not?
Oh, this is a great question. Why are some of these experiments better in space than here on Earth? Some of them are not necessarily better, but some are. So for example, protein crystals are one of the, they've been done for now a little decades in space. And on Earth, of course, with gravity, a lot of protein crystals, not all, but a lot, are limited to the two-dimensional as they're growing in their dishes or wherever they're growing. In space, they can go in all directions, right? Because there's microgravity, they're not limited by gravity. The same with like when we do alloys of metals, right? So we have a furnace that we can melt down metal and then allow it to recrystallize. And here on Earth, the heavier elements would sink to the bottom. And so as you're crystallizing out, you'll get a disproportionate amount of heavier to light. But in space, they're just going to crystallize in place in situ. So some things work better. The plants, this is more of a demonstration of like, what are the differences? So kids will appreciate this, but they have the same plants growing in Florida as the ones that are growing on the space station, and then they're making a comparison back and forth to see what are the differences. So some experiments are done that way. There's a whole lot of really cool medical things that can now be done. They call it like science on a chip, but there are these like very small things that they can do medical type of research that doesn't even have to involve like tissues from animals or things like that. They can just do it on this chip. So there's a lot of really interesting things to do. So I would say in your curiosity to also check out, NASA has they have a spin-offs webpage, but there's also always a benefits book put out online as well. So I can't even keep up with all these 4,000 experiments, but I'm super interested in them, just like you, so I try to do it. And it's for us, right? Like, granted, the research is done for curiosity and for real problems that we need to solve back here on Earth or in space, but it's also benefiting us. So it's your tax dollars at work. Yes?
What did it feel like during liftoff?
Oh boy, liftoff is just a crazy experience because you've been lying on your back waiting for at least 2.5 hours to like make sure that you're ready to go. They've been topping off the hydrogen, the oxygen, that orange tank, checking out and making sure everything is going right. So at first you're supposed to like just chill there, and some people actually take a nap. I did not take a nap. But I rested. And then about 20 minutes beforehand, you start doing some actual checkout stuff as the astronaut, like you're part of it. And so then you're like, oh, I'm getting excited, like we might actually go. But I've also worked enough missions where I know that things can happen, like a boat might go into the space where they're not allowed to go, or an airplane may go over and they're not supposed to, but they may. So you may get the no-go, or the weather may change. All these things can stop you from going. But it just kept progressing, so we're getting more and more excited. And then when those main engines light and they're coming up to thrust, you actually get a little sway of the vehicle that you can feel. And then the most crazy shock in your back. And like, I don't play football, but it felt like maybe the whole team has tackled you. And then you're suddenly shaking for those 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Then the solids come off, and then it's a smoother ride. But you're accelerating so fast that you're starting to pull G's, so it feels like someone is sitting on you and they're getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and they're so annoying, and you just want them to get off you. And about that time is when you are in space and you float up in your seatbelt. That's how it feels.
So could you speak a minute or so about your experience undersea?
Oh, sure. I love living underwater. So we do analog missions, which is just a fancy term for, like experimenting in a easier way, a cheaper way, about a mission that we want to do in the future. So we've used analogs in the desert, we use them in Hawaii, we're currently sending astronauts to like Iceland and Canada, to areas where there are really good basalt flows for geology. But when I was there, we went underwater 5 miles off Key Largo to the Aquarius Reef habitat, and we lived in this, essentially it's like a submarine, but it's attached, so it's not a submarine, but it's a habitat that's attached to the seafloor, 65 feet underwater. And inside, you can wear your t-shirt and shorts, but outside you have to be either in scuba gear, which we wore, or you could swim over to the toilet, which allows you to have your head above air. It's a little cupola thing. Your head is in the air and your body is in the water, so you can use the water as your toilet. Anyway, that was a different way of going to the bathroom. More adventurous in space. But it was amazing. We were looking at how we could sample asteroids in the future, and as a geologist, like, this was really fun to me to think about. If we go work at an asteroid, how will we be working at it? So it was really quite an amazing 2 weeks underwater. Yeah. Yes, back here in the yellow shirt. Yeah.
How did you store the food and stuff?
How do we store our food in space? Yeah, so we have lockers, and you saw those blue boxes I was carrying. Actually, some kids built these shelves. They were like high school students, and we fly things that high school students build because it's giving them real practical experiences. But we store the food in these shelves that they've made, which are really like put together baggies. And then the food is in plastic. So we rehydrate it, we stick some water into it through a needle, get it good for us to eat. We eat it. We like scrape that plastic because we want to make sure we get all the nutritional value. Also, we don't want a lot of bacteria to grow, right? We don't want to create our own cultures in space because while people tend to get, our immune system gets suppressed, bacteria and viruses go crazy, and so we don't want that to happen. So we try to clean up all of our food. It's a good plug as a parent. And then we put it in the wet trash. And that's how we eat our food. But as you saw, now we can melt some of that plastic packaging and turn it into tomorrow's tools. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, yes?
Okay, seeing that of all the mishaps that NASA's had, like when your first mission, you're going out in space and you're ready to go, what was your first thoughts and your feelings? Were you like half nervous, scared, or?
Yeah, like how did I feel when I was first going? Because I was a fifth grader when Challenger happened, and also when I was applying, we had just lost Columbia. So our class came in and we weren't even flying shuttles. We were in a safety stand down until we understood how we lost Columbia and how we thought we could fly people safely. We talked about that well in advance with our families. Of course, my husband and I made plans since our daughter was so young. Really, the day of, like, my biggest nerves were like pretty much the same as in the right stuff, as they show. Like, I just don't want to mess up, right? Like, you've worked so hard, you've done all this work, you know that people are counting on you, there's all these science experiments, all this stuff, and you just don't want to mess up. So that's really what most of my fear was. I must say I was a little startled when the first, the engine's light, because you can't simulate that. We can simulate pulling G's and all of those things. I mean, we don't even simulate it, we just pull the G's, but in our planes. But I just wasn't ready for those engines to light. So actually, if we had sound, you would have heard us giggling, because it actually makes you like nervous laugh, like the whole, not just me, like a whole bunch of us were nervous laughing, because it's crazy, it feels crazy. Yes, one more minute. Okay, I have one last question, so let's make it a good question.
So, do you wear the same clothes every day?
Ooh, we could wear the same clothes for a while because we don't get too dirty. Yeah, and we definitely don't have washing machines in space. But on a shuttle flight, we have enough room that they pack a lot of different outfits for us, probably more clothes than we actually need. So we have like a different shirt for every day, which is kind of fun because then you can like wear a color that might represent your favorite team, or like we wore a pink one day for breast cancer, so stuff like that. But on the space station, they stretch out their clothes for much longer. And you might wear an outfit and then you might turn it into your exercise clothes, right? Which you know are gonna get stinky anyway. Because then you're just gonna throw these things away and they're gonna burn up in the atmosphere. So yeah, we're looking at better fabrics because we know already athletes use a lot of fabrics here that wick sweat away, that quickly evaporate, that don't hold a lot of bacteria. Some of these we don't fly right away in space because we're worried about fire, and so we want to make sure that they wouldn't pose any risk or any, we call it off-gassing, but they don't release anything that could be toxic to our crew members. But yeah, that's how we dress in space. It's a pretty cool question. Well, I just want to say thank you. It's been great to have coffee with you and share experiences. And I hope that you always remain curious and challenged and courageous. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.